So what a week 9 it was in the NFL, but now week 10 will be on its way soon enough. And here's 5 quarterbacks I'm going to add off waivers going into week 10 of the fantasy football season. And the first guy, it's going to be Carson Wentz. I know last week I told you guys to drop him, but now with a lot of buys coming up and him back on the wire, if you didn't keep Wentz because you needed that extra bench guy or whatever, this is a good week to go out there and get him back. Is Carson Wentz now. He's got an easy schedule coming up the rest of the way. He was on bye this week, so you could actually go out there and pick him up now before the Monday night game. Is Carson Wentz. He got dropped in 18% of leagues coming into the Sunday. So now Wentz, he's got the Giants, once again Cleveland, Seattle, and Green Bay. A pretty good schedule heading into the fantasy playoffs. So if you got a buy or you just got a struggling quarterback and you want to go with Carson Wentz, he's not a bad guy to get. In his last game versus the Giants a few Thursdays ago in week 7, Wentz finished the game with 31 fantasy points, and I could see him have a decent game this week in week 10 versus the Giants. So he's the first quarterback I'm going to get. The second one is Derek Carr, who's out there in a bunch of leagues, and we saw him come off a good game once again with Carr versus the Los Angeles Chargers. And Carr, he's available now in 62% of leagues as Carr, so he's definitely out there in a bunch. He had 165 yards and 2 touchdowns versus the Chargers. Not a great game, but he still had 18 fantasy points. He's got a good schedule coming up in the next couple weeks. He's got Denver, Kansas City, who he threw good against a few weeks ago, then Atlanta and the Jets, so his next 4 games ain't bad. Carr, he had a bad game last week in the bad weather this week. It was more the running game and the defense that helped the Raiders. But I like Carr's matchups and stuff. So Carr, he's a guy I'm going to go out there and get. The third guy is Drew Lock, surprisingly. I had him as a sleeper going into week 9 versus Atlanta. But Lock, he looked good again with another great game from Lock for fantasy purposes. Even though they lost, he had 34 fantasy points with 313 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns with an Inter, and he even gave you 47 yards rushing his Lock. He's available in 80% of fantasy leagues, and he's got a good matchup versus the Raiders next week in a game in Las Vegas, which I think will be a shootout. So both quarterbacks I recommend to go out there on waivers is get his Carr and Drew Lock. Lock, he's starting to get a rapport. Now he's had 2 good fantasy games in a row with 25 and 34 today was Lock. And then Hamler, Tim Patrick, Noah Fant, he got banged up, and Jerry Jeudy's coming along too. So Lock, he's got some underrated weapons there, even though the run game gave him nothing today versus Atlanta. He'll be the third quarterback I'm getting. The fourth is a guy, if you've been listening, I've been ripping for the first 2 weeks since he's been a starter, is Tua Tagovailoa, and I'm going to admit I was wrong with a performance he had today with 248 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions or fumbles, and he gave you 35 yards rushing. Tua, it just seemed like he was converting big third down after third down for this Miami Dolphin offense. And Tua, he has some poise in the pocket. He made a couple good throws and stuff. So Tua, he's not a bad option next week going into week 10 versus a Charger team that can't stop no one. Quarterbacks get their points, and teams go up and down the field. So Tua, he'll be home in Miami for that one next week. He'll be the 4th quarterback to go there and get. And the fifth and final guy is Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings. I know he's got a tough matchup next week versus the Bears, but I think he could still get something going. Today he had a good game with 26 fantasy points, 220 yards, and 3 passing TDs. And you know, Chicago, their first assignment's going to be trying to stop Dalvin Cook, who once again went berserk with 3 touchdowns and 230 total yards I think he had. So Cousins, he's got good receivers there, and Thielen and Jefferson, even though they've been quiet the last few weeks. We saw him get the young rookie Irv Smith Jr., who I'm going to talk about in the tight end ads for week 10. But Cousins got weapons. Chicago, I know, is not bad, but that's a Monday night game, and like I said, the attention's going to go to Cook. So if you're in a pinch, especially in a 2-quarterback league, Kirk Cousins, he's a guy to go out there and get. He's available in 69% of fantasy leagues, so that's 5 quarterbacks I'm going to try to go grab on waivers heading into week 10.